You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I did a bit of work with the National Bureau of Statistics. Also worked with the media for quite a number of years, really pushing financial literacy on media platforms across Lagos and Nigeria as a whole. There is no financial institution that really caters to gig workers the way a commercial bank would cater to a 9-to-5 person who has a decent paying job. We've just created the first step to be able to make sure that that becomes automated, payments become instant. Our goal for this year is to have 5 million transactions. For me, that's real impact.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Tunji Andrews, who is CEO at Awabah, which is a digital platform that helps millions of Nigerians get on the micro pension scheme, which is the first step to a financially secure future. Welcome to the podcast, Tunji. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
How are things in Lagos at the moment?
Oh, great. We just finished presidential elections in the country. So, yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, but very optimistic about the future.
Definitely. Interesting times. Very much looking forward to see what happens in Nigeria over the coming years. Staying positive, staying optimistic. So thank you. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Tunji.
So Tunji is an economist. I have a big passion for what I used to think was financial inclusion. I think I have a different understanding of what it should be now. I worked and did a bit of work with the National Bureau of Statistics. Also worked with the media for a bit, radio, TV, for quite a number of years, really pushing financial literacy on media platforms across Lagos and Nigeria as a whole. So really, pretty much most of my career has been around financial services, but more around, trying to help the average person understand how financial matters affect their day-to-day living.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So you've mentioned you are an economist by profession. You've always had a passion for financial inclusion and how your thoughts in this area have changed over the years. In the introduction, I mentioned that you are CEO of Awabah. So I was hoping if you could tell us a bit more about the company, the work that you're currently doing in Nigeria, and, what you hope to achieve through Awabah.
Awabah is, for Nigerians who might understand Pidgin English, it is actually, I'm losing the battle of Awabah, but it's actually pronounced Awabah, which is Pidgin English for our money. So Awa is O-U-R, our money, Ba is money. So Owowa, our cash, our money. And what we're building really is a financial wellness platform for gig workers, giving them the financial wellness tools to be able to build wealth for themselves. And the simple thinking around it is that as of today, and you look around, there is really no financial institution that really caters to gig workers the way a commercial bank would cater to a 9-to-5 person who has a very decent paying job. And I say that with the full understanding that we have microfinance banks across Nigeria and across the world. But in the real sense of it, you want a bank that allows you to have leverage, that caters to your nuances as a gig worker. You want a bank that knows that you don't have all the required KYC that everybody has.
Yes.
You want a financial institution that understands your day-to-day grind. And we thought to ourselves that to be able to build those tools, we had to find the necessary platform to be able to build from. And we found pensions, micro pensions. And that's where we started from. So what we have started to roll out is micro pensions for gig workers across Nigeria. And this acceptance is pretty great. But now we've now moved on to the next stage where we're now bundling it with health insurance, life insurance, accident cover, low interest loans to be able to make sure that these people have the required leverage to actually build wealth that they desire to.
Thank you for that, Tunji. So the platform, as you mentioned, is designed to enable gig workers to build wealth for themselves. And in the introduction, you mentioned your passion for financial inclusion. So it's clear that you are a huge advocate for financial inclusion, whether it's in the informal sector, gig workers. When and where did your passion for this area develop?
I think it's simply a few things. The first was me trying to get a job right out of uni. And the first few jobs I got didn't give me the required coverage that a person with a 9 to 5 would get. And I remember thinking to myself at the time that I wanted to get a car lease. I wanted to buy a car, but I wanted to get the bank to finance the car. And every bank I walked into said, you had to have a salary account. I had bank accounts, but I didn't have a salary account. And I realized that that was some sort of disenfranchisement.
Yes.
I didn't really get it at the time, but I kept being puzzled at the conversation, at why segregate your customers based on salary accounts. And I started to understand the thinking behind the bank's decision to go that way. Needless to say, I never got the car at the time. But it was at the back of my mind that we need to change this. This shouldn't be a normal practice, right? This shouldn't be a normal practice. But then I sat through teaching once, and the person was speaking about financial inclusion. And the person did a great job in explaining how having more people within the financial services space and having more money in that space allows other people to be able to get loans from the space. And it's supposed to be a multiplier for wealth. And I got super excited about it. It felt like I discovered fire. I wanted to just run into the streets and tell everybody, have you heard about this thing called financial inclusion? It's going to save us all. and I think this was in 2009 or so. And I was super passionate about it. And I mean, you need to ask anyone who's known me over the last decade or so. I mean, much of my interactions are around financial inclusion because I absolutely 120% believe that was what was going to save Africa from poverty. And I delved headlong into it. But with everything, you start to have more information, especially when you are not just speaking about it on the radio, but you are now actually a practitioner. You start to see the real truth, and then your feelings around it evolve.
Very much true. I always find the more I learn, the more I realize how little I do know.
Absolutely.
So there you detailed that trying to get a car in the early days of your professional career developed your passion for financial inclusion. So looking at your professional career, I've seen you've been described as a creative entrepreneur. So is Awabah, is that your first entrepreneurial venture or have you had a few before?
Nah, it's not the first. It's not even the third. The first one was a monumental failure.
Oh no!
So it was retail.
Yes.
So think about I was importing and trying to distribute hand sanitizers in Nigeria long before the Ebola virus, long before COVID.
Okay.
I was just that person who could, the world is going to need this, I need to get it across, and I could see it everywhere in the UK, but it wasn't big in Nigeria. And, I went into it headlong. And, I was just one of those naive entrepreneurs at the time where I felt all I needed to have was the product somewhere. People would just come and buy it. So I went with all the money I had, bought tons and tons of hand sanitizer, brought it into the country, kept it in the warehouse. I felt like Will Smith in Pursuit of Happiness.
Okay.
After he bought all those X-ray machines, I felt like, yes, I've done it. I felt that way too. And it was crazy because months after I realized I couldn't sell it because somebody had been watching me distribute and then the person brought in a cheaper version of what I had. and flooded the market, and I couldn't just compete, so I went out of market. I mean, that was the most painful of the ventures. The other ones were, pretty much around, maybe I wasn't really ready, my mind wasn't in the right place. But talking about the creative entrepreneur bit, it was really around my work around the media. There was a lot of times where I started to create what would be a financial literacy ecosystem where we're churning out material on, just helping people understand what was happening in the economy, talking rebasing, inflation, GDP, just basically doing those kind of things and just trying to make it into commercial content. So yeah, I did a bit of that too. And that was pretty successful. I just kind of realized later on that my passion for that wasn't the goal. That was just like a conduit to where I needed to be. And it was from there I came up to start Awabah because I felt I'm not the person to just be talking. I needed to get in the ring and get my fingers dirty. And that's why we started this.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So you detailed your entrepreneurial journey, your successes and failures leading up to Awabah. Awabah is quite unique and it stands alone, I guess, in the Nigerian tech startup space. So I was wondering, how did you identify there was a gap in the market for what you wanted to offer?
So I did a little work with a private pension company for a little while, just basically working around the model. And it fascinated me. It really did fascinate me. And I thought to myself, this is a fantastic model if it could be available to every Nigerian.
Yes.
At the time, it wasn't. Right around COVID, when COVID hit and I saw the vulnerability, because at the time COVID hit, I'd already thought to myself, I wanted to, get in the ring and, do something to, give leverage to informal sector workers in Nigeria. And at the time I was thinking credit. Honestly, I was thinking credit. But then I started to realize that the credit models around were just not what I felt were helpful to Africa as a whole.
Okay.
And I didn't want to just jump into being another one of, right? But then investments was kind of tricky. And I didn't also want to sell what wasn't needed. And then I was having a conversation with somebody at the time. We were supposed to work together on this project, actually. Then he just said, what about micro pensions? And it just fell into place. When you've been looking for fire, right?
Yes.
You've been trying to find it for a while. You just didn't know what it was, but then you saw somebody with a lighter somewhere and just sparks it.
Yes.
And I was like, yes, that is it. You get how amazing that would be. And it was like, this thing has been around for 2 years, but nobody has been able to crack it. I'm like, okay, good. And, it just also falls into the bit of who I am as a person. I generally like to do difficult stuff. If it is not going to near kill me while doing it, I probably might not be motivated enough to do it. Sitting down and looking at how difficult it was and seeing what the upsides could be, it just made absolute sense. But more importantly, it was during COVID. The vulnerability of the common Nigerian was so exaggerated during that point that it was clear to your eyes that if this happened again, many, many people would die. If this extended for 8-9 months, people, go crazy. It was the point where a lot of these people earn day to day. So not allowing them to earn means that they have no food. The vulnerability was just clear to me. And what we needed to do was to create structures that help them build sustainability. They don't have the money to be able to put tons of money aside. But can we build structures that allow them to be able to put little, maybe $2 every month, maybe $0.50 or $1 every month, and able to create some leverage over it? I realized, yes, it was possible. But was it financially important enough for the big financial institutions to focus on it? No. Except, of course, when it reaches scale. But somebody has to do the work from zero to scale, right?
100%.
And when it reaches scale, everybody's going to jump on it. And it just made sense to me. My duty is to make sure that it goes from zero to scale to the point where the financial institutions around the world see that the gig worker across the world is probably the most important customer you could ever possibly have. And for me, that's my own personal goal. But, Awabah is how we're doing it true.
So you've detailed, I guess, the journey to creating Awabah and also that eureka moment when the idea came about and you knew it had potential of being a viable and successful business. Now you're currently fully embedded in the Nigerian pension industry. I know this is quite a very open question, but from your perspective, what is the current state of Nigeria's pension industry?
That's a deep question. I'd say it's evolving. It's pretty young. The new pension system in Nigeria only got birthed in 2004.
Okay.
I think it's going to be 20 years this year. So it's really young. And comparing it to pension industries like the UK, America, which are over 50 years old, there's just no correlation. And even with the Nigerian banking system, it's way behind in terms of where it should be. But one of the things that the Nigerian pension industry has done, and it's gotten right from day one, is the right structures in terms of safeguarding people's pension funds to make sure that when they do retire, their money is waiting for them when they retire. But everything else in terms of innovation, disruption, growth, the banking industry had when things like NIBs came into play, maybe 10 years ago, we've still not experienced that in the pension industry. Hopefully, Awabah will be the company to provide that technology and that disruption, but we're still pretty much at our infancy as a pension industry.
So you've detailed Nigeria's pension industry in terms of it's evolving, it's still young, also the positives and negatives of the industry. So if we look at what you're doing, where do you believe that you're adding value to the Nigerian pension industry?
So ours is bringing technology best practices from across the world to be able to make the pension industry in Nigeria be what it should be. Recently, we just finished a product called PenPay, which is a payment platform for pensions, micro pensions specifically. And so understand how payments work in pensions as of today. So I don't care how big a company you are, you want to make your pension remittances for your staff members. So you might be 10,000 people. The way you pay is that you send the check or you do a big bulk transfer and then you send a spreadsheet saying, okay, for that 10 million naira, 14 naira goes to this guy, 25 naira goes to this guy, 16 naira goes to this guy. And there's an entire team in the pension fund administrator that is called reconciliation that then reconciles each payment to each person's retirement savings account. It's tedious, it's cumbersome, it's manual, it has no place in 2023. We've just created the first step to be able to make sure that that becomes automated, payments become instant and happens real time. We've also created an app which allows you to be able to sign up to any pension fund administrator in the country and, be able to have interactions with your pension savings. Our job is bringing technology that exists across the world and just bringing it into Nigeria. And we're following the examples of some companies that have been doing this for decades, or maybe not up to a decade, but years and years. In the UK, in Singapore, in India. India has the largest micropension space in the world. So we are following those steps and bringing that technology and, just putting it into the space. But apart from that, we follow the spirit of the regulator, the spirit of the pension industry. But knowing that they want improvement, we're just trying to make sure that there's always technology available for the appetite that the pension industry in Nigeria has.
So you detailed, I guess, the technology and products that you offer, such as PenPay and your app that works, I guess, almost like a pension brokerage system.
The pension industry works in this way. So there are segmentation. There's the pension fund administrator, who is the front-facing part of the industry. So you've probably heard about them. They are the pension funds that you hear about everywhere. Then there is the pension fund custodian, who holds the money. The pension fund administrators speak to you, but they don't hold the money itself physically.
Okay.
The people who hold the money are called the pension fund custodians. So they hold the money and they basically have that. Now, what we are is a shared service provider. So talk about it from the perspective of the industry distribution mechanism for the pension industry. So it's not like a brokerage, more like the conduits to the entire general public. So we work with the pension fund custodians, the pension fund administrators, to be able to make sure that each and every customer is adequately taken care of. So we're embedded somewhere in that ecosystem. So not really a brokerage, more like the distribution arm.
So I guess working almost as a distribution hub and a pension service provider through some of the products that you offer, what do you think is the importance of people specifically in Nigeria's informal sector having access to, say, pensions, health insurance, life insurance?
So here's the way I look at it. And, a lot of people have said this to me many times, that these people don't have enough to save. And I say they can't afford not to save. Nigeria being what Nigeria is, it's like difficult like anywhere in the world, right?
Yes.
And if you live day to day and you earn day to day, it means that there's going to be a day when you will not be able to go out and work, either because you're ill, either because you do not have a job to go and work, or more importantly, you get old. Now, that means that there will be a time you will have nothing to fall back on. So they really need to do it. So they need to save. But the problem here is it's difficult. Maybe you earn 2,000 naira every day, and somebody tells you you need to save 100 naira of that 2,000. That's difficult, right? You need to eat, you need to get on a public transport, which you pay everything with cash upfront before you get access to. So what we've done is to be able to take all the financial services together and put them in a small box, right? And use every one of them to make sure that you're able to get access to the rest. Follow me here.
Yes.
So for instance, our life insurance product is such that normally you should only get full access to the life insurance cover after you've paid the entire premium. But because we've been able to give you a bouquet of financial services for maybe about $2 every month, you get the full value from the first day you get on the service. So if something happens to you, God forbid you die, your family gets access to that life insurance cover. It's the same way when you get access to our health insurance cover, which is very low cost and gives you access to over 1,500 hospitals across the country. So what we are doing, and we've always thought about this way, think about your pension funds. Your pension funds return for you every year, right? So if they return, say, maybe 12%, is it possible that we could take 1% of that 12% and use it to give you health insurance cover for the next year? Yes. Will anybody think about doing that for you? Probably not, because they want to get more profit. But because we understand the nuance of the average Nigerian who doesn't have that extensive, robust income bracket, we've been able to build the very needed financial services to be able to help them take care of their tomorrow while today is being taken care of. Of course, it has had us needing to, be a bit more deliberate in creating these products with a bit of empathy, but we finally created it, and we believe we have the model financial institution for gig workers.
Fantastic. You mentioned some key points there in terms of people can't afford not to save, and every little counts, as there will be a time when you need something to fall back on. So people might be listening to this and thinking, this sounds great, but how do you guarantee that my pension is safe? So I was hoping you could detail some of the measures or guarantees that have been put in place to ensure that your customers' pensions are protected.
So this is probably the biggest shining light of the pension industry in Nigeria, which I think is the safest really in the world.
Okay.
I say this with full understanding of how the pension industry in Nigeria was created. To be honest, a few people in the industry think this is also a negative, but I will get to that eventually.
No problem.
So here's the thing, because of where we were coming from as a country, and people need to understand the nuance of Nigeria's pension history. So prior to the Pension Reform Act of 2004, there had been a pension system in Nigeria where once you just retire from work, the government just pays you a pension. But the problem with that, it was riddled with fraud and, all kinds of malpractice, and people were stealing people's pension funds. And in fact, a few people went to jail for it. It was really a mess. So 2004, there was an act that was created to kind of clean up and create a new pension system with private pension fund administrators and private pension fund custodians. And so the administration of your pensions is held by three individual entities. There's the pension fund administrator, who is the pension fund administrator that you see and they advertise across Nigeria. Like I said earlier, the people who actually hold the money, the pension funds administrators never even get to see the money. The pension fund custodians are the custodians of your money. So they hold the money for the pension fund administrators, right? And for them to pay out any money at all, there needs to be a go-ahead from the pension regulator. So for there to be fraud within the industry, you have to have three entities come together to agree to do it, which is almost impossible. Now, the second part of it is that the pensions regulator has given guidelines to what the pension funds can invest in, and very safe instruments to ensure that whatever happens, when you retire, your money will be waiting for you. Whatever happens, right? Your money will be waiting for you when you retire. Now, this is where I said earlier that some people in the industry feel it's a negative because they would like to invest in more aggressive investments, right? They want to grow the investments very dramatically. But we see with cases like in the US and in the UK, where there are conversations around, are we sure our pensions are still there? Is the 401k still there? Your pensions will not be there when you retire. Those kind of conversations. With Nigeria, that is not even a possible conversation to have to begin with. So it is both good and bad in terms of the fact that it's really safe. I think it is safe to the point where it is too safe. I think that's the problem. It is too safe. But I always say that, you have to realize where we're coming from. We have to think about all the bad in the past and, take extra measures as a country to be able to make sure that people's money was safe. But I think we overdid it a bit. But a little more safety doesn't hurt anyone.
You mentioned that Nigeria's pension industry is one of the safest in the world, and some of the challenges that the pension industry has faced in the past that has, influenced how it is structured currently. So typically, with regards to how a pension performs, what external or internal factors from, looking at it specifically from Nigeria, what external or internal factors do you usually have to consider when looking at how a pension performs within Nigerian markets?
So I think the two significant things, because I'm an economist and I was an analyst at some point.
Yes.
I tend to look at those conversations around investments, long-term effects of devaluation, long-term effects of inflation on the Naira. And it's a thing that you must consider. It's a thing you must consider if you're investing long-term in the Naira. But I've also said this, right? Inflation happens every year. So some years is 16%, some years is 8%. You have to be able to judge the long-term effects of inflation on the currency to be able to judge if your pension fund is returning, to be able to at the very least, retain value. So if you start saving in your pensions at 20, you would only get access to it in 30 years. So you have to look at the long-term effect of inflation over those 30 years vis-a-vis the return every year. Do not forget that your pension fund also compounds every year. So there's a compounding interest effect on your pension fund every year, plus the fact that it is invested and it continues to grow. I think from our last calculations, we looked at it that if your pension funds are growing at a minimum average of 11% every year, your pension funds are still being, the value is still being retained. If it's growing at 15%, then you're not only retaining capital, you're also getting a lot more over. But generally, Nigerians tend to look at it from the perspective of, oh, I used to buy a PS for $200 last year, and this was the value of the naira then, and look at the value of the naira now, it's not great. But if you think about it from the perspective of your interest is compounding, the value is compounding year on year, and it's still increasing based on investment, your pension funds are necessary and it will continue to grow, and it will be valuable to you when you do retire. So for me, I think it's a great thing to have, really. It's a great thing to have, and value is retained.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you mentioned in terms of looking at inflation, the compounding effect as well that influenced the performance of pensions in Nigeria and some of the challenges around that. So if you look specifically at yourself and Awabah, what challenges have you faced in terms of launching this solution? Because how I see it, it's a solution that is disrupting a large established market and institution.
I think that's the challenge. You just mentioned the challenge. You just mentioned the challenge. So here's the thing, right? The pension industry is used to doing things a certain way. And I understand that. But when you're trying to sell to a young and emerging population who are on Twitter, who are excited about crypto, who are excited about NFTs, you have to bring a bit of nuance into what you're selling or how you sell it. And I think we've just had those issues of trying to explain that if you're going to sell pensions to young people, you can't have them receive value into their retirement savings account in T+2. T+2, it means that transaction date and 2 days after. It can't be. It cannot be. They would not understand it. It just doesn't make any sense to a 21-year-old. It makes no sense. I will understand it because I saw in Nigeria when you log in a check into a bank and then they'll tell you, oh, we've received it. Then you get value on the third day. So I get it. I have some historical references to be able to accept that. But if you're selling to the 21-year-old, 22-year-old, who's only ever known banking to be instant, you need to be able to give them financial services that are also instant, or else you lose their trust. So it is in trying to explain this and trying to also at the same time understand the industry's perspective for safety and order.
Yes.
It has been in the center that has been the biggest challenge for me. I tell people that this has tested me the most as a person because I've needed to draw on everything on my inside. I think I have used the word "sir" more times in the last 2 years running Awabah than I have in my entire life. You know, I use "sir" in every conversation. Good afternoon, sir. You know, yes, sir. Is that? Oh, sir. Because you're talking to people who have no understanding how tech works in large numbers. And you have to be traditional finance in the way you relate to those conversations. But that is also removing the fact that you need to innovate, you need to disrupt. But you also have to understand the nuance of the industry so that you're able to work along with the nuance of the industry. So if the nuance of the industry requires that I'm old-fashioned in the way I relate to them, that is exactly what I'm going to do. But I have realized that in trying to give services to my customers, trying to be in the middle of this thing is still where it is to where it should be, that's been my biggest challenge, especially when you're competing with speed financial products that seem to be competing with yours that are supposed to be instant everywhere. That nuance can be very challenging, but we're bridging the gap as quickly as we possibly can.
Fantastic. You detailed there your biggest challenge is bringing nuance to what you're selling, especially when selling to a younger audience against working to the institution's standards and established ways of working in Nigeria. So you are currently focused on the Nigerian market, but do you have ambitions to make an impact throughout Africa and expand into new markets?
So here's the thing. I don't always want to sound crazy when I talk about this, but this problem we're trying to solve is not a Nigerian problem.
Of course.
It's not even an African problem. It's a global problem. It's a global problem of gig workers across the world are just disenfranchised, just the same way I was when I was trying to get a lease on a car. And I couldn't because I didn't have a salary account. Gig workers across the world have that same issue. And for me, it's a place where we start with Nigeria, we hopefully spread across Africa, reach to Latin America and also, parts of the UK, because we know that giving value to gig workers across the world is something that is very crucial. Think about it. Uber drivers across the world continue to go on strike because they feel they're not getting treated like real staff, right?
Yes.
With Awabah, Uber can be able to give them all the required financial leverage that they would get if they were in a 9 to 5. We would give them health insurance, we'll give them life insurance, we'll give them pensions, we'll give them accident cover for the price of $2 a month. Again, I don't want to sound crazy, but honestly, this is a global problem that we're trying to solve. And for me, it just happened to start with Nigeria.
I agree. So you mentioned this problem that you're trying to solve is not just a Nigeria problem. It's not just an Africa problem. It is a global problem that you're trying to solve, which sounds extremely exciting. And I think it's definitely possible. But I guess expanding into new markets requires a lot of capital. So I was wondering, where is the capital coming from? Do you have investors that are backing your ambitious plans?
I mean, we're speaking to a few right now, and for anyone that is listening, hey, contact us. We're always looking for capital. We have a few backers here and there, got backed by Google, and now we're reaching to global VCs across the world to be able to, raise the required capital to be able to do that. But we feel that success in each market is what will help us grow into different markets. I'm a bit old school in the way I think about some of these things, but I'm also realistic enough to know that capital is required to be able to scale at the rates which we would like to scale. So we're reaching out to as many venture capitalists across the world as possible to be able to make sure we get there as quickly as possible.
You mentioned something quite interesting there in terms of success in each market will define how you grow and which markets you expand to next. So how do you go about measuring the success or impact that you are making?
I think it's simple. The lives touched. So we have a simple metric that we follow at Awabah per customer. It's transactions per customer, right?
Okay.
So going by every time a customer interacts with our platform, the customer is doing something for their life and their future. We're such an essential product that what we sell is financial wellness. So every time they interact with our product, they're either getting health insurance, they're either getting life insurance, they're getting pensions, they're getting accident cover. Everything I've just mentioned are essential for life and living from the financial perspective. So every time they interact with us, they're preparing for or taking care of their financial wellness situation. But you see, these things that I've just mentioned are not things that come natural to everybody's thinking. If you were to think about it from the perspective of, hey, everybody wants to watch a movie, that comes easy to thinking. Everybody wants to buy clothes, that comes easy to thinking. You get, those are things that come naturally to you. But for us, the more we see transactions on our platform, it just shows how much of an impact we're making, because not only does it mean that people are preparing for their future and getting to that point of financial wellness, but we're actually making them understand that it is critical for them to actually do that. And these are gig workers. These are not 9 to 5s. These are not people blue collar. These are not white collar people. These are people who naturally are predetermined not to even think about it. So the more we see transactions on our platform, the more we know that we're doing and really, making a dent. So for instance, this year, our goal for this year is to have 5 million transactions, 5 million individual transactions.
5 million, brilliant.
For that goal, you have changed lives. 5 million is you have changed lives. This is in Nigeria where people have gardeners, drivers, maids that they do not have any sort of cover for. This is Nigeria where factory workers have absolutely no cover. This is where Nigeria where delivery guys have absolutely no cover. With 5 million transactions, we have changed lives and given protection to, millions of people. For me, that's real impact.
Thank you for that, Tunji. So you detailed how customers are currently interacting with your products, and the transactions that they are making are one of the trends that you look at to define success. So if we look at trends, what trends in Nigeria's pension space are you currently seeing that you're excited about?
I think the biggest has been just the learning that employers of gig workers across the country are actually more open than we thought about giving value to their casual workers. We came in thinking B2C, and that was our entire focus at the beginning, entirely just talk to every single person, get them on the platform, and that worked. But we did not realize that, a lot of people who had organized staff members, maybe 100, 200, 1,000, were actually really thinking about, giving some sort of value to their staff members, but they just didn't have the product at the right price point for them to be able to deploy to their team members.
Yes.
And with our service, we just come with not only the right price point, but we also came at it with the required package offering. So it's like this was the right bouquet they needed at the right price. I mean, we just came in at the perfect opportunity for a lot of them. And we've not even done much marketing. In fact, we've not done anything. I think I've just been pasting it on my socials. I'm serious. I think maybe that's why we're not as eager to market it, because just pasting it on the socials has been like overwhelming. People have been like, yo, sign me up. I need to get this for my team. And I'm like, okay, this is good.
Brilliant.
That is a good trend. And it actually gives me some sort of hope that employers in Nigeria are not as terrible as I thought they were. Yeah.
Fantastic. So if we look past the current trends and into the future, as the problem that you're trying to solve is not just a Nigeria problem, but it's also an Africa-wide problem. So the future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from the perspective of access to pensions and financial wellness for the general population?
So poverty is a huge monster, right? Think about it from the perspective of everybody thinks about their day-to-day living from the perspective of their ability to be able to eat and take care of themselves adequately. So even down to the very minimal conversations of elections,
yes,
type of school their children go to,
yes,
type of opportunities they make available to their families, the kind of healthcare. So Nigeria is that place where you fall ill, and instead of going to the hospital, which is actually cheaper long-term, the person goes to a herbal practitioner that doesn't have any sort of qualifications, takes a mixture, a concoction that is called agbo, and they say, oh, this cures malaria, this cures typhoid, and then the person drinks it and, the person feels they're better for it. A lot of it is rooted in the scarcity of resources.
Yes.
I believe, especially as more people adopt our model across the continent, that with access to financial services that are fit for purpose for gig workers and casual workers across the country, we will have more people making better decisions about their lives and their future. And that will start to translate into more things. It will translate into seeking better decisions. even up to the point of electing better officials,
Yes.
into government. So, I mean, you just need to look at states where there's high poverty and states where there's low poverty. The thinking and the concerns are completely different. And I believe that this is possibly one of the biggest dent we can make on poverty on the African continent if we take it seriously.
Thank you for sharing that, Tunji. So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself and Awabah in 5 years' time?
5 years, let's talk the end of the decade. Our goal for the end of the decade is to be the model financial institution for gig workers by the end of this decade.
Awesome.
We want to be that financial institution where people across the world model to be able to create financial services, financial tools for gig workers wherever, in Indonesia, in Singapore, in Saudi Arabia, in the UK. We want to be that model financial institution.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You've achieved quite a lot in a short period of time. So I think the sky is definitely the limit, and looking forward to seeing what kind of legacy and footprint you will leave, not just in Nigeria, Africa, but globally.
Yes.
So yes, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Quote of the week.
One question I ask each guest is a bit different to the rest of the conversation. As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
I do.
Fantastic.
It's simply, this too shall pass.
Yes.
Is it going great right now? It will pass. Is it really difficult that you think you are about to die? It will pass. Just keep going. This too shall pass.
Enjoy the moment.
Exactly.
Keep going forward.
Keep going. It will pass. It will pass.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. As we've come to the close of the conversation, I actually can't believe we've been speaking for so long. It's been such an enjoyable conversation. I was hoping you can give us some closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are interested in what you do, or they're just curious about Nigeria's pension industry.
All right, so you can follow us on our social media handles, Awabah Nigeria, on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We basically share a lot of what we do on those platforms. You can download our app from the Google and Apple Play Store. It's Awabah, that's Awabah. You can download and see some of the things we have there. And the great thing about it is if you're Nigerian and you live outside Nigeria, you can also gift people back home pensions, health insurance, life insurance also as it is. We also get to write from time to time, just basically sharing our thoughts about gig workers, informal sector workers, casual workers across Nigeria, and how they can better leverage available financial tools to be able to create wealth for themselves. But all in all, you can also get to follow me. I'm deeply passionate about financial conversations and, just basically propagating the fact that Africa can save Africa if Africa is serious about saving Africa.
Brilliant, brilliant. What a way to close today's conversation. It's been extremely enlightening, educational discussion for me. I've learned so much about Nigeria's pension industry. It's clear that you're offering something that is unique and much needed on the continent, and also that you have a passion. You're doing it for all the right reasons. So I'll be keeping a close eye on how things develop and looking forward to seeing you fulfill those massive ambitions.
Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Thank you for taking the time and sharing your knowledge and your journey with us. So look forward to keeping in contact. Thank you, Tunji.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a great one.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.